And a short time ago, I was joined from Canberra by one of the key independents who decided to support Julia Gillard to form government, the member for New England, Tony Windsor. Tony Windsor, thank you for making time for us tonight.
A pleasure, Lee.
Have you spoken to Julia Gillard and Tony Abbott since making your announcement?
Yes, immediately after the press conference, both Rob Oakeshott and myself went down to see Tony Abbott and had a chat to him for a while, and then went round to the Prime Minister's office and spoke to the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister. And
what did Mr Abbott have to say to you?
Oh, well, no, he was very good, and he's been excellent right through this process. Both leaders have. I think they actually understood, and I said to him, you know, we've both gone through a similar process, really, in terms of the waiting and the stress, etc. No, they've both been very good through this process.
Mr Abbott may have been very good, but do you anticipate there might be some hostility from elsewhere on the coalition benches?
Oh, no doubt there will be, and I'd expect that. Obviously, people are disappointed, but the personal relationship between myself and Tony Abbott has grown through this period, and I think that's a genuine regard for one another. I do have more regard for him than I did have before, and I thank him for the way in which he's treated us.
I noticed in your press conference today that you said that the regional packages each party offered were proof of their past regional neglect, and that you said that if regional voters want to go back to being taken for granted, then they should go back to the old ways and the old parties, vote for the old parties. Is that your preemptive strike against an anticipated campaign against you in New England by the coalition parties at the next election?
No, I've actually been saying that for many years, and if you look at my maiden speech in the federal parliament, and I think I said a similar thing in the state parliament, that country people represent 30% of the vote. That's not a majority, and they've assumed that they can never really influence things unless they're tied to a city-based party. And in doing that, they are taken for granted by both of the major parties, in my view. So I think what we're seeing here, through the nature of a hung parliament, is regional Australia expressing itself through the independents to a different party, in a sense, the Labor Party, and actually generating some what will be enormous activity in regional Australia. And the message, I guess, is that if you do want to be taken for granted, to go back to the old ways, just lock yourself in on one side of politics, because that's been the great shame of regional representation. It's tended to be locked into the city-based majorities, and country policy is then determined with city interests in mind.
In terms of the process around this decision, who arrived at the decision to support Labor first, you or Rob Oakeshott?
Well, we spoke it through. When Bob had left the room and he'd made a decision that he'd support the coalition, and I fully understand that. He had his process. We had a process that we'd agreed on, and we started to talk about the pros and cons of both options. And this was about 1:30 today. It's coming down to the wire. But I guess the thing that really put me over the line was, in fact, the broadband issue, and to some degree the renewable energy / climate change debate. I think we've got to step back and have a very hard look at that, and I think the coalition were reluctant, and the broadband issue would have been virtually torn up for a cheaper version.
But who of the pair of you declared yourselves first for Labor?
I can't remember, to tell you the truth. I think we were both going through the process, and I think I said to Rob Oakeshott, "What do we do, paleface?" and I think we just came to this sort of consensual argument that we should, in terms of all the issues that are there and the potential to really demonstrate that country Australia can express itself differently and get benefits for our constituents, we thought this was worth a go.
You mentioned the NBN and climate change before, and in the press conference today you said that another of the reasons you were supporting Labor was that you thought they had the most chance of seeing out a full 3-year term. You said there was a greater risk the coalition would go to an early election because they'd have more chance of winning it. Now, Peter Harcher in the Herald this afternoon has written that those comments prove your self-interest and, quote, that on his own confession, Windsor is prepared to deny the Australian people the government of their choice so long as he can prolong his position of extraordinary leverage in holding the balance of power. What do you say to that?
Well, I don't apologise for it. One of the things that we were looking at, and there may well have been a 75-all decision here, one of the things we were looking at was going back to the polls. Now, I asked both sides of the parties, the Liberal Party and the Labor Party, did they want to go to the polls? And they both said no. So obviously one of the other things we were looking at was stability and workability of the Parliament, the relationship between the lower house and the Senate, and longevity of that Parliament. And it's no secret that particularly during the first week, quite a few people within the coalition were saying, well, if we get a deal, we'll go for as long as the polls, as soon as the polls look good, we'll be off to the election. So there is real self-interest in this, not for me, but for regional Australia. If this Parliament can be held together, there'll be some enormous benefits accrue to regional Australia, and so there should be.
So does that mean that you accept that part of what you want to do is prolong your reign in this position of power?
My word, and I think that's what the people who voted expect. They've voted in a strange Parliament in this sense, that it's a hung Parliament, which I think can be very exciting, not only for country people but for everybody, including the members of Parliament on the floor. And the longer it goes, the better it can go. But, I don't think people want a Parliament to last for 6 months and then back to the polls again.
But do you then accept that in large part your fate now rests on the competence and effectiveness of this Gillard Labor government? Because if it doesn't perform well, then you will be held at least partly responsible for installing them to power.
Well, we've got provisions for no confidence if they're not performing well, and there could be a change of baton on the floor of the Parliament too in relation to the coalition. So there's a whole range of things that come into play by the very nature of this Parliament. But I think people have voted and they want the Parliament to go for as long as it can, not just sit for a while and then head off to the polls again.
Rob Oakeshott said at the press conference today that he didn't think the Gillard government had a mandate. What do you think? Well,
the Parliament itself will have a mandate, and this is going to be one of the extraordinary benefits of this particular arrangement. The executive doesn't have a mandate because it doesn't have the total numbers anymore. So when debate occurs about particular issues or policy, all members of Parliament will be able to be involved in the debate. And in a sense, I think we're going to see a lot more things like when we watch a conscience vote in the Parliament, people giving genuine argument to try and convince others that what they're saying is right and to give ground if they need to. But that's what Parliament is supposed to be about, not the sort of farce we've had for the last decade or two.
Tony Windsor, I have a sneaking suspicion we'll be talking again during the next 3 years. Thank you very much for coming in tonight, and we'll talk again.
Thanks, Lee.